Lots of people like to talk these days about energy. I'm taking in your energy. Well, the big question is, did we soak up the narcissistic person's energy? And what does that really mean? The answer to that is yes, we did, because that's how relationships, human relationships are, especially ones that are developmentally meaningful, parents, caregivers, or impactful ones that last a long time. A long-term marriage, for example. Yes, we soaked up their energy and some of their responses and habits, and frankly, in order to be in those relationships, to attach to them. That was part of the soaking up process. But even beyond attachment, we did soak up their energy. It may show up in how we respond to conflict, a certain impulsivity that we may have, a bit of a temper we find ourselves sometimes experiencing, perhaps an impatience and intolerance. But it's a part of us. And we can probably say pretty confidently where it came from. And we hate it. We hate that part of ourselves or multiple parts of ourselves that we clearly absorbed from the narcissistic relationship. And I have told you many times on this channel why it happens. I mean, sometimes it's just plain exposure. You get exposed to something else, you're going to soak some of it up. It's exposure, survival, mimicry, attachment. Think of regional dialects, right? I grew up in a region of the United States where fizzy drinks are called soda and sandwiches are called subs. So I smile when I hear people call them hoagies or pop. It feels different or cool. I know what they're talking about. Nobody taught me those words and sat me down one day and said, kid, here, this is a soda. You absorb it because it's the way it's done and it's said around you, right? And that's small stakes compared to habits and emotional regulation and beliefs that we absorb from the narcissistic relationships around us. Now, this video was inspired by a few recent conversations that I had with Dr. Frank Anderson. Check out his books. We'll put the link to his books in the video notes because it's really great. And his application of something called parts work through a model called internal family systems, right? In one of my conversations with Frank, we talked about this idea that the stuff we absorb, there's parts of us that are from them. And this comes up all the time when I work with folks who experience narcissistic relationships, particularly narcissistic parents. So if you can, go ahead or pause the video, go ahead and grab a piece of paper and reflect on some of the stuff you can see that you probably don't like. So things about your stuff you don't like, okay? Parts of you, and there might be stuff you do like, but parts of you that you see come from a narcissistic parent. Write it down. I can tell you I did it. I said mine are being somewhat controlling and wanting to do things the way I want to do them, shutting down during conflict, and then staying shut down for a long time. Those are my parts. And I know when I do that, I can leave the other person feeling abandoned. I second guess myself all the time, and I hope for reassurance, but I feel bad about wanting that reassurance. I get impatient with people who need lots and lots of guidance and reassurance, and I don't comprehend, and I get mad when they don't comprehend or get things easily. And that I also have a bad habit of I work all the time to the detriment of other people and balance and leisure. I hate these parts of myself. I hate them. And I overcompensate and I try to not do these things, but especially when I'm tired or depleted or I feel let down, I go to these places. And when I really think about it, I view them as weaknesses in myself, and I view them as being icky, as me having a short fuse at times, as me not being a nice person. And I want to disavow these aspects of myself. I often don't think about it, and then I do something, and I'm like, oh, I hate myself. And it's a painful exercise what I'm asking you to do, all these parts of yourself that you don't like. Because we have to look into what we did absorb from the relationship. Because this icky stuff we have can coexist with our empathy and with our best parts, and even with our conscious desire to be the exact opposite of the narcissistic parent, or be completely different than our narcissistic partner. So in some ways, even our trying to be better still reflects the narcissistic person, because it is a direct penduluming of being or trying to be different than them. And still not necessarily just being us, we're just trying to be different than them. We're just committed to being different than the parent. It could be you feeling that your mother was a judgmental, unempathic, snobby, sneering, passive-aggressive person. So then you remain singularly focused on being open-minded, constantly present for other people, warm and open, and holding back your anger even when it is warranted. But the painful recognition is all that passive-aggressive stuff sort of seeped into the groundwater of your family system. And there is a part of you that goes silent and withdraws and withholds when things get heated or you are uncomfortable. And you know this, and you know where this part of you comes from, and you hate it. This is why getting to the core of us, who we are, is hard. And it sucks when we realize a part of who we are, because we are made up of lots of little pieces, often fragmented and disconnected pieces, and healing means bringing that together. But all of this is something that we absorbed from those early narcissistic relationships. We can't pick and choose. All of us is all of us, and part of us came and grew up within the context of that narcissistic parent. We are not born with our fully formed selves. Our sense of self is shaped by our environment. And while a lot of what gets shaped when a person has a narcissistic parent are the accommodations we have to make, or to be what the parent wants, to be undyingly loyal to the parent no matter what. But some of it is just us absorbing how the parent is, how they go through the world. And when we see that in ourselves, we want to curse ourselves out. We can't just take a piece of psychological scissors and cut around those absorbed parts of ourselves from the narcissistic parents away. And frankly, we wouldn't want to. Then it is sort of engineering ourselves still into think what we think we are supposed to be. And our authentic selves are, in fact, a culmination of all that has happened to us. Good, bad, ugly, loving, hateful, abusive, joyful, innate. Wanting to cut pieces off too much is how we dissociate and go through the world in fragmented ways, and rather than as embracing all of these elements of ourselves and saying, these are all me and they're all okay, and I can be vulnerable and own up to them. It's interesting, in our cosmetic surgery infused world, where people can, starting at relatively young ages, nip, tuck, inject, cut, suck out, fill in, enhance, and create new faces and bodies. I often wonder if that is what people hope to do with their psyches. Cut out the parts they don't want, enhance the parts they like. Narcissistic people try to do that. But for everyone else, it doesn't work that way. When we cut parts of ourselves out, we are denying part of our identity. No one is all good. And frankly, I know it's hard for you to hear this, no one is all bad. Human beings' psyches are messy. Even for the narcissistic folks, the behaviors that make people mean and antagonistic and lack empathy and callous and hurtful and manipulative and abusive, well, in folks who do that, there is a major lack of integration. They kind of almost walk into the world always looking for a fight so they can dominate and win and then feel safe, and not being the shivering, scared little kid they are. That's their walk to walk. We can't change the narcissistic people, and they can't get rid of those scared, rejected, unloved parts of themselves. They just have to bring their arms around all of it and recognize that. And that's on them, not you. Real love of ourselves, of others, is not loving parts of a person and then rejecting others. It's like an all-in kind of deal. And most importantly, we have to do that integration work for ourselves first. We often want to go out and rescue every human being out there like they're a puppy. But it doesn't work unless you do it for you first. When we start to do it for others before we do it for ourselves, you can start to see how narcissistic relationships can be like thorny bushes that we can't ever fully get unstuck from. Listen, I sure as hell can't get into a primer of trauma treatment here on how we embrace all these subdivided parts of ourselves, the parts we hate, the parts that feel weak to us, the parts that are hurt, the parts that are strong, and bring them all together. This is where trauma-informed therapy becomes so important, because our bodies and psyches hold this fragmentation, and we behave in ways we sometimes feel ashamed of, angry at, and that fosters a self-loathing when in fact all of it makes sense based on our life stories. And part of many of our life stories were narcissistic or abusive family systems. And family systems where we look back and see, yikes, what I am doing now, some of this is what my mother did, or what my father did, or my step-parent did, or, oh God, please tell me I'm not my mother. I can't have kids. I'll mess them up. No one will ever want me. I need to climb into a box and hide from the world. When I work with clients who have narcissistic parents, there's always a moment of terror when they look at me wide-eyed and said, that thing I did, that was all my dad. It's like I was channeling him. Oh, Dr. Ramani, am I him? Maybe I'm just like him. Maybe I'm every bit as narcissistic and awful. Maybe I'm the problem. And that is a bit of a cliff to walk back from. Because yes, there are moments when we are just like them. There are parts of us that are just like the narcissistic parent. We grew up with them. That's how it happens. For example, some of you are natural musicians, and you may have absorbed this gift from a musician parent. You may not have even liked your musician parent, but you grew up with it. You inherited something from them, and you get it. It's the same with cooking, working with your hands like a carpenter or woodworker, as an artist, as a doctor, you name it. Our behaviors and beliefs and ways of being are no different. You aren't them, but you got some of those pieces and parts, and that's okay. Awareness and knowing is everything. Whether that means knowing how to care for ourselves at times of stress and depletion, getting the support we need, showing ourselves grace when we are under stress and aren't behaving in the best way, apologizing in a genuine way and committing to doing better, but not indicting yourself and making it all about you being a terrible person because of that part of you that is so much like the narcissistic person from your life. Because then, if you want to make that argument, you should be a great person if you have parts of yourself that are compassionate and kind, or really smart or wise, or know how to bake a great loaf of bread, but we tend not to do that. We focus on the one thing we never want to be, or the part of us which is like the narcissistic parent, and then we call ourselves bad. Healing is about integrating it all and having compassion for all of us, even those parts of us that feel like they're from the narcissistic parent or parents. To do that takes away the fear, the menace, and the sense of being out of control we can have when those elements of ourselves come up. It can literally feel like being possessed. Narcissistic family systems often do their harm because of the absence of consistent, unconditional love. Because we didn't feel loved for all of ourselves, but only felt love for parts of ourselves. The parts that performed the way that the narcissistic parents wanted us to. And that means the healing, the so-called cure, as it were, is to lean into having compassion and care and love for all of ourselves, even those parts of ourselves that we see in some ways are us carrying forward the narcissistic parent stuff that feels like it's coming through us. intergenerational trauma and intergenerational patterns, they're always going to happen. But we can take them out of the darkness by bringing them into the light and integrating all of us into one gorgeous, imperfect whole, and tolerating that there are parts of ourselves that we don't always love. Listen, I doubt we will ever live in a world where lots of people will embrace their cottage cheese looking belly or gravity battling breasts or wrinkled faces. It's a shame. But I ain't that naive to think that's ever going to happen. However, psyches are different. And when we can start doing that, and trust me when I say it's a daily, even an hourly battle, and embrace the parts of ourselves that we don't love, we open ourselves up to our whole us, which ultimately is the only healing tool there is, and the ultimate form of resistance to the toxic and narcissistic relationships, past, present, and future in our lives. There are universes within you, folks. Bring them together within you. And what that means is integrating the black holes alongside the big, bright stars. Good luck with that. Thanks again.